On Friday the 11th of December, 1936, the final vote on the abdication bill was passed in Parliament, and Edward VIII ceased to be king. He had reigned for 326 days. His father's premonition that within 12 months of his death his son would ruin himself had come true. The newly created Duke of Windsor spent the afternoon packing and reading letters of support and sympathy at his country house, Fort Belvedere, in Windsor Great Park. A sham Gothic royal folly with battlements, rows of cannons, turrets and a tower. It had been built for William, Duke of Cumberland, between 1746 and 1757, then embellished by the Regency architect Sir Geoffrey Wyatville in the reign of George IV. Prince Edward had taken over the Grace and Favour residence in 1929. He was later to write, "The fort had been more than a home. It had been a way of life for me. I had created the fort just as my grandfather had created Sandringham. I loved it in the same way. It was there that I had passed the happiest days of my life." Sir Giles Gilbert Scott had added a guest wing in 1936, and Edward had installed central heating, ensuite bathrooms, a tennis court, swimming pool, and in the basement a Turkish bath. It was his private retreat, where he had entertained most weekends, and where his romance had played out with the woman for whom he had given up the throne. Now he was having to leave it and his staff to venture into an uncertain future. At 4 p.m, Winston Churchill, who had joined him for lunch and to help polish his speech, left the fort, his eyes filled with tears, muttering a couplet by Andrew Marvell about the beheading of Charles I. He nothing common did or mean upon that memorable scene. Next there was a dinner to say goodbye to his family, his sister Mary and his mother Queen Mary, widow of George V, his younger brothers Henry, Duke of Gloucester, George, Duke of Kent, and Bertie, the new King George VI. At 7 p.m, his faithful chauffeur George Ladbroke drove him the 5 miles to Royal Lodge, where the family had gathered. It was a strained atmosphere. Bertie was coming to terms with the responsibilities and challenges of his new role, whilst the rest of the royal family was still reeling from the events of the past few weeks, when David, as Edward was known in the family, had threatened to commit suicide if he could not marry the twice-divorced American, Wallis Simpson. The new Duke of Windsor, on the other hand, felt liberated. His obsession with Wallis had given him an excuse to renounce the role of king, which he had increasingly not wanted. It had also allowed the government, concerned about his political views, especially towards Germany, and whether he had the qualities needed to be monarch, to force him to abdicate.